doesn't involve text, maybe just direct instruction, or you're looking at it as a pre-assessment. So before we get started, I just kind of want to prime the pump a little bit and look at, I put 7 bullets on the board, and these are 7 skills that we really do work with our students on almost on a daily basis. These are targets that we're always looking to push students to improve in. So questioning, having students generate their own questions and questions at a higher level, making predictions, and making connections. And these are not necessarily the same thing. They both involve where students are now with their knowledge base, and sometimes we're trying to get connections made to other students' ideas or to new text or new information we're going to deliver. Sometimes we're taking what students know and having them predict based on that, and using anticipation as a huge teacher advantage to get more attention and more engagement from our students. Building on ideas, analyzing, providing descriptive feedback. I have FB, it's not Facebook, it's feedback today. And synthesize and create. So I know you would be in agreement with me that throughout the week, we are having students challenging with each one of these 7. And so for today, I'm going to give you some targets so you can appreciate where I'm coming from with this instruction example. So let's say that you have some new content to deliver, and we're going to use some direct instruction. We're going to aim at students' productive talk. And so when students are engaged in productive talk, that is, just like it sounds, that students are talking with one another about the content that you've given them. And the more likely a student is to stay focused on topic and not want to get into those sidebar conversations about what did you do last weekend or what are you going to do tonight. If we want them to stay focused right on the concept, it's in our power based on what we're giving them to work around. And so sometimes it involves, looking at your classroom environment, how you're grouping students, what's the task that you're giving them, does everyone have a role? So we're going to look at all of that as we go through how the SWOT analysis can be an effective tool for you to use. We're looking to make those neurological connections, and that is the deepening of the paths in the mind. If I'm studying something in construction like blueprints, I need to tap that pathway that students already have some kind of knowledge base on those blueprints. So we're going to look at that as well. Literacy skills is something in today's world we're constantly looking at. Critical thinking, and in today's world you're also seeing a much bigger focus on student-led processes. And so for us as teachers, there is this huge push to get us to pull away from direct instruction that goes beyond 20 to 30-minute increments when we're working at the high school level. There's all kinds of science and research around attention spans. I probably don't need to say this, but today we know that the 30 minutes of content delivery should be followed up by some type of formative assessment. And students need an opportunity to take that knowledge that you've just given them and to construct their own meaning. So if you don't pause after you've provided the content and create some way for students to construct meaning, you're going to overload them. And so that's why we focus so much on formative assessments and how you can deepen those neurological connections by allowing students time to work in formative assessment. Formative assessment's also one of the teacher's greatest assets for getting a handle on where each student really is in their understanding levels. So I'll talk about this as we go through, but just like in most of, if you've watched any of my other videos on teaching strategies, the worst mistake a teacher can make is to assign a SWOT analysis and then sit down at your desk. Just try to pretend that your desk isn't even the room and it's not even an option. Because the power is for you as a teacher to listen in on the conversations as students are collaborating, not to step in and guide their thinking necessarily, but just to quietly listen so that you can get a judge on, or make a judgment on where Billy is versus Sally versus Kanaya. You need to know who's participating, who's asking the really high-level questions, and who is really hesitant to get in there in the conversation. Or maybe with the SWOT analysis, someone who doesn't have a lot of ideas to contribute, you can address that individually. And we all know that it's in that individual conferencing where the real magic happens and we can push kids so much farther. So that's always our goal. So these are our targets. We're going to talk about a direct instruction. I want my kids to productively talk. I want them to deepen those connections. I hope to work on some literacy skills. I want them more critically thinking And I want it to be a little bit student-led. So the next sheet is SWOT analysis. I typically make it ahead of time and give it to students because I want them to work at a certain number of bullets when they're trying to work collaboratively. So this is something that I would group students in threes. I prefer 3 over 4 because I really believe in the law of diffusion of responsibility. And typically when there's 4, either 3 people will push the one to be quiet, or you might have one that just says the 3 of them really don't need me. So my whole focus as a teacher is really getting that 100% participation as often as I possibly can. But sometimes you may have to group students in 4, and that's completely up to you. If you have the resources in the room, if you're one of those lucky teachers who has whiteboards all over the room, you can just station kids at the whiteboard and maybe even have them do this with a partner. But sometimes 3 is just a great number. So that's up to you. Here's how a SWOT analysis works. I tell the kids, okay, so you have 5 bullets on the S and W, 3 bullets on the O and the T. The S stands for strengths, the W stands for weaknesses, the O stands for opportunities, and the T stands for threats. Now, we'll caution you right here. Not everything that we deal with kids has a threat. So some content I will say, let's make the T tweaks. And you can be creative. I mean, you could even change this T to something else and make up your whole new acronym. You know, that's what we as teachers learn to do very fast. So let's say that I have my learning instructional target as nutrition. So this just says, Culinary Arts 2 students, before we begin our unit on nutrition basics, let's do some individual and group reflection on our own current level of knowledge and understanding with nutrition. So this is where I'm setting the stage for my students. This is what I would actually say to my students, and I might have it posted just like this. And so they know that we're going to be getting into nutrition, and this is where I'm going to get into the whole neurological connections and making students really stop and reflect, what do I know? So you can do this in different ways. You could have students, if you're a teacher who has those individual little whiteboards, those are a perfect tool that you could run this as a think, pair, share, or a think, ink, pair, share, which is, you know, the approach where students think on their own, they write on their own, then they come together at the SWOT analysis paper, and then as a whole class you share out. That is one of the most effective ways to do this. And if you were a teacher being evaluated by a principal, you would be demonstrating complete understanding of differentiation and the need to have students working individually and then coming together as a team. So I highly recommend that. So let's say that I tell the students in this culinary arts class that we're going to be looking at this book called Stealth Health. And this is a book where the research is on painless nutrition and how Americans should be eating. So before I give them time to do this, I say, let's look at our own reflection on what we know. And then students start by looking at what is if I'm Sandy and I'm sitting here and I'm thinking about where I am right now, what are my strengths concerning nutrition? And I know areas that I'm weak in. I know that maybe I eat fast food 4 times a week, or I've never read a label in my life, or maybe my weakness is I don't really even care about nutrition. Or I might have a multitude of strengths. Perhaps I am someone who reads every label and I do a lot of research on people who are very healthy and the advice that they give. So kids will be everywhere, just like any content that you're giving. And I will tell you that sometimes when you're working on filling this chart in, this O causes a little bit of critical thinking for students, which is good. You want them to productively struggle. You might have to step in and say, do you understand the opportunities? So what I have kids do then is say, okay, so look up here and what you wrote as a strength, could that become an opportunity? So you might have that maybe a student has as a strength is I try to eat 5 vegetables every day. So an opportunity could be that maybe they could plan meals for the class based on what they are already eating. Same thing on the weaknesses. You can take something that's a weakness and say, all right, so if we never deal with this weakness, how might that become a threat? Or what's something that you could tweak to make it better? So you give students time to work, and you are walking around the room, watching what they're writing, and you're listening very closely to the conversations. When the students have exhausted the time, perhaps you'd say, take 12 minutes to work on this, or you could just walk until you think that students have written down enough conversation and the bullets are complete. What I like to do is, if I'm using chart paper such as this, I'll pull them all together and bring them to one spot in the room. And if you know a KWL is a process where you say, what do you know, what do you want to know, and what did we learn? And it's the kind of formative that you use throughout the lesson. You can follow that same approach with a SWOT analysis. So for instance, I can take these, and let's say that I have several from my class, and I can go through the strengths, and I can go through the weaknesses, and then I can introduce the text. And I can say, all right, so we're gonna read this 4-page section on how she sneaks nutrition in and when people find out what the difference is. So then I'll give them that text, and I'll set them to work afterwards on, does any of what we're reading relate to any of what we see up here on these boards? And as you go through the unit on nutrition, even 2 weeks, you can have these in the room and you can consult these charts, and students can see that it's their lead in the process because these are their ideas. And you'll find that most of the time when you do a SWOT analysis, students will hit on the targets that you wanted to hit on anyway, and so it works really well. It is also a great opportunity to really demonstrate what it means to analyze. A lot of students do things around analysis and don't take the time to model their thinking about what they're really doing is breaking something down. And so students will appreciate learning to categorically think and then to bring it all together. A lot of times, if you're hesitant to try with content, I will tell you that in the CTE world, a good place to start with a SWOT analysis is just saying, okay, so you've chosen to go into IT, or you've chosen to go into early childhood. I want to know what you know or what you think about the field that you've just chosen to go into. So we're going to do a SWOT analysis around your career field and the possibilities for your future. Same thing. S is for strengths, W for weaknesses, O for opportunities, T for threats. And then you let students work, and of course there might not be any threats, but there could be. So if I am in rural southern Indiana perhaps, and I want to be aviation mechanics, a threat to me might be, are you willing to move? Because if you want a high income, you're going to have to move to a different region where those career fields are plentiful. So just thinking about that, it leads to a lot of teaching that is student-led, and it also really helps students construct their own meaning, which is the whole point of the formative assessment. So I hope you find that helpful, and you can please leave me comments here on the page if you are going to try it, or once you try it, I would love to know how it works for you. Thanks!